I would like to introduce Chris Grundeman, who will be presenting the 2025 State of Network Automation, What's Really Happening in Production Networks. Chris is an executive advisor specializing in network infrastructure strategy and how to leverage your network to the greatest possible business advantage through technological and cultural transformation. Welcome back, Chris.
All right. Yeah, thanks everybody for being here this afternoon. I know after lunch is it's tough to get moving again. Hopefully everyone had a good time on the roller coasters last night, the social. It's a very interesting social. I like that. We'll do a little bit of a roller coaster ride here because I do have 29 minutes and 42 seconds to get through 60 slides, but I think it'll be worth it. We'll take a look at the results of this year's State of Network Automation survey and go over kind of who answered the survey, what the results were, and then some insights from those results, and a little bit of like what I think are the key takeaways, although I do want everyone to absorb the results and come to your own conclusions as well. First of all, I am not a statistician. I'm not a professional survey taker. I don't know that any of this is completely scientific in any way. But I do think it does provide some directional guidance on kind of what's going on out there in the world right now with network automation. There were results from 2023 and 2024. Those QR codes will get you to those presentations of those past year results. And then we'll do a little bit of comparison with those results as well as we look at today's results. So the results are in. First of all, let's look at who answered the survey. So this year we had 681 responses. Of those 681, 352 people actually answered all the questions. That number is definitely lower, right? The full number is bigger than the lower number. Although part of that is because this year we did a thing where if you answer that you're doing no automation at all, the rest of the questions automatically get skipped because you don't have any input on the rest of them, which we thought would make it easier and friendlier for folks to be more honest about where they're at in their automation journey and allow more network engineers to answer the survey. So that's totally expected. We had 58 countries represented, 34 different industries and 36 different network types, 19 different job roles or functions, and a really wide range of network scale. So we'll look at what that all means here. So first, comparing to previous years, way bigger response this year than the past. So thank you to everyone who answered the survey. That's awesome, right? In 2023, you see we only had 78 responses. 2024, we did better with 106 responses. But this year, 681, so I just totally blew it out of the water. Also, the number of countries kind of tripled. We asked about industries this time, which we didn't ask about before, so that's a new stat there. The network types, interestingly enough, increased by 11 every year. More job roles were represented, and of course, like I said, a wide range of scale. So first, as you might notice, with 58 different countries responding versus 20, we did see a much more global response. So the percentage of folks from the US who are responding is going down as a percentage, which I think is great, because that means as the survey is growing, it's also becoming more global. So that's great. This is a different way to look at kind of the top countries that responded. You can see the United States definitely still is the highest one there, but a lot of European representation, and it goes on and on. These are all 58 countries, not to leave anyone out. I don't expect you to read that, but if you do want to take a look at the slides, you can find your country on there if you're one of the ones who responded. So we also asked about industry this time, and you can see technology and telecommunications still the biggest respondents. We also asked about what type of network the person who was responding was actually working on. And enterprise IT networks were the biggest, ISP the next one. This is a different way to look at the industries and the network types. So you can see on the left there, the top industries going down, telecommunications and technology, as I said, are the top two. This year, financial and banking came in really strong. Education, it goes down. And then the top two network types, corporate IT and ISP networks, were the biggest respondents with a nice mix of other types of networks in there. This is a comparison over the years. You can see enterprise has been the top for a while, but what I think is interesting is in 2025 with the bigger response pool, all the way up to 42% was enterprise IT. So we got a much bigger response from enterprise folks this year. And ISP actually grew as well. So those seem to be obviously the big kind of two types of networks that are out there. And as we're getting more responses, we're seeing that reflected. Makes sense. We asked people to say what their job title was. This is a little word cloud of some of the titles. I think a more interesting way to look at this is we also did a drop down to say what your actual role is. And I think what's interesting here is that network automation engineers are now, for the first time, the highest percentage of respondents, which is pretty cool. Not by a lot, but that role seems to be either growing or at least becoming more aware of the survey, right? And as I said, like some of these results take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt because it is a self-selecting respondent pool, right? This is not no kind of double-blind test or anything like that. So people who are interested in automation are probably more likely to answer the automation survey. We can see that this did change year over year. The automation specific role or function was the 4th in 2023, the 3rd in 2024, and now is the top respondent. So I think that's a good, strong signal. As far as size of organizations who are represented here, you can see a few different ways to look at this. One question we asked was about total number of people working at the company. Another question was total number of people working on the network, and then the size of the team that the person was on. And you can see there's a pretty good mix across all three of those metrics for all the networks that were represented in their answers. Another way to look at scale is by device count. So you can see we asked how many switches, how many routers, how many firewalls are on the network that you work on. And again, the main thing I'm showing here is that pretty good mix of different sizes of networks. We're from all the way up to 50,000 plus switches all the way down to a single firewall. Okay, so what's more interesting than who responded, or at least as interesting, hopefully, is what they actually said. So we'll dive into that here. This is the good stuff, right? We're going to look at how people believe, at least from their personal perspective, how automated their network is. So this was a question we asked, thinking of the entire life cycle, the entire network, what percentage of your network is automated? And this is a little bit interesting graph because it's percentages of percentages. But so on the left, the little green bar on the far left there where it's 8%. So 8% of people said that they have 0% automated networks. And on the far right, the other green bar, the 1% of people said that they have a 100% automated network. If you're one of those people, I would love to talk to you. Find me after this talk. Maybe it's true. And if it is, I'd really like to talk to you. As you can see, there's kind of definitely a weighting on the bottom there. Again, another way to look at this, I think this is a pretty accurate view. Again, the 0% was 39 people basically said they had fully manual networks, no automation whatsoever. The biggest group by far, with 46% of respondents, falls in that 10 to 30% automated. So that definitely seems to be kind of where most folks are in this journey. And then as you go up, there are folks who are all the way up 40 through 100% automated. This slide is mostly comparison with previous years. This is the way I broke it out in the past. I think the 0 to 20, 30 to 40, I think this is not, I think the other way. I think this way is a better way to look at it. But I did want to put this one in so we can compare it to previous year's presentations. Another way to look at this, though, is that for 50% and below was 73% of the respondents were less than halfway automated as far as thinking of full automation of your network. The mean and the median there, the mean is 37.45%, which, if you saw the previous presentations, that number is actually going down, which is an interesting question for when I'm looking at the survey. In 2023, we had about 42%, 2024, about 42%, 2025, 37%. So I don't think that the level of automation in networks actually went down. I believe this is related directly to the fact that we got a much higher response rate. So more people answered. So I think this number is probably more accurate. The growing enterprise representation, I think, probably had something to do with this. The fact that enterprises are answering the survey more and are probably a little bit less automated than some of the ISP peers they have. The geographic diversity could be a factor. The fact that we really encourage early stage folks who weren't automated at all, we really tried to find those groups and get them to respond as well. So I think all of that worked. And so the overall number within the responses went down. But it's still in the same range, right? About 40% of our networks are automated. So this is a new question for 2025. We asked how the automation that they do have is being used. And you can see here, configuration deployment is the biggest bar. What's interesting is if you look kind of below that, the yellow piece, deployment with validation, is kind of the same question, but are you doing config deployment or are you doing config deployment with validation? Much less people are doing it with validation than just not. Now, it's possible people didn't understand the question, but it's also possible that this is a very scary statistic that people are pushing configs without automated validation, which I do not recommend. Another way to look at how automation is being used is just kind of stack it up like this. So again, configuration deployment automation was the highest, monitoring was the next, deployment but with validation was below that, and then no automation rounds out kind of the top 4 there. Potentially more interesting than that view is to look at it this way. So this is basically, I think, with the answers ranked from kind of least sophisticated to most sophisticated, in my opinion anyway. So no automation is at the top there. Monitoring automation is the next one, which has a pretty good response. But then like just documenting state of your network, which is something that I think probably could be automated fairly easily, very low response rate. Monitoring of the state of your network is a little bit lower. Then configuration deployment is really big. We seem to be starting in the middle with automation in a lot of ways. This has come up in other talks about automation and other forums as well as here, that we're kind of starting in the middle with automation, which is an interesting fact. And then you go down to right deployment with validation, config management with drift detection, semi-autonomous remediation, fully autonomous remediation, the lowest one, and then I don't know, which is an interesting stat as well, that you're working on a network and you don't know what you're doing with automation. So what is being automated? This is kind of an eye chart. So we'll flip right away to this one. And what I did here was I basically took the answers to the question of what is fully automated on your network, and I added what is partially automated on your network, and then stack ranked them here. So backups is the highest answer for what's automated. Device deployment is big. Firmware upgrades, firmware or software upgrades is big. Service provisioning, and then non-provisioning configuration. You can kind of see all the way down to the 13 items there. This is kind of how people are using automation, or what they're automating in their networks. Again, a little bit of an eye chart, but the amazing reason I put this in here is you can see that this is fairly static, right? So device deployments, service provisioning, firmware upgrades have been in the top 3 all 3 years. Backups we actually added as an answer in 2024, and that became part of the top 4, and then it has stayed there. So that's what is being automated. This question is how is it being automated, right? So what are you using to automate? You can see the potential answers here were, and this is you can choose all of these if you wanted to. It's a select, whichever ones are true. So this homebrew scripts is one option where you're writing your own code, whatever language you're using. Open source applications, but without support. Open source applications with paid support, and then commercial applications that you're actually buying an automation tool to use in your network. And you can see the percentages here. Homebrew and open source without support, definitely the highest there. And this has not changed over the years. All 3 years, open source software without support and homebrew automation have been the top. And commercial applications have been the 3rd one, and then open source software with support is the 4th one. I do think that's interesting. I don't know exactly what it says about the industry, but the fact that we're using a lot of open source tools but are unwilling to pay for support on those tools, I think is an interesting tidbit that may help us drive more automation. In that, then once people said, hey, I'm doing homebrew automation, right? I'm writing this stuff myself. What languages? And again, you could kind of write in whatever answers you wanted. So you could put as many things as you want. Here's the top 10, where you can see Python with 356 mentions. That's 92, 93% of the people who answered. Blows everything else away, right? That's what's being used by most folks, at least who answered the survey. There are a bunch of other answers in there as well. I don't know whether Ansible is a programming language or not. When you do free text, you get some interesting answers. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Then we look at open source software and what open source software tools are being used. Ansible is the top one, and you can see number 6 is also AWX, which is an interface front end for Ansible. So maybe those should be added together, maybe not, I don't know. But Ansible is definitely a big tool being used by the folks who answered the survey. Netbox and Nautobot, right? These sources of truth, these databases that are specific to network automation are being used quite a bit. And then it kind of goes down from there. Norner is a good standout, I think. One worth looking into if you haven't. And then the commercial tools, again, one thing to note here is that we're showing the top 12, but again, this was a much smaller pool of folks. So Ansible, again, came out on top as far as commercial tools people are paying for to use for their automation. But it was only 29 people who said that. Whereas if you go back, right, and you look at 356 respondents said they're using Python, and 162 said they're using Ansible for free. But Ansible comes out. Cisco's a big player here with a lot of different tools. Nokia comes up as well. Arista's on here. So all the big folks, Palo Alto, people are using the proprietary tools from their vendor with their hardware. That's what it looks like in most cases, and then also Ansible. So this question, we talked about who is actually the one building the automation, who's doing this. So the top answer by far is network engineers with automation skills. So on the panel this morning, we talked a little bit about this, like kind of career development and what you want to be learning. It seems like whether it's good or bad, we're definitely expecting network engineers to be able to do some automation themselves. So I think that is a clue to kind of, if you're looking at what do I learn next, understanding the basics of software development, even if you're not going to become a full-blown programmer, is probably a good idea because it's definitely being expected. I don't necessarily know that we should be expecting that, but it is, it looks like to me. Then software engineers is the next one, and you can kind of see down from there all the folks that are involved in network automation at the companies that are doing automation. This is another way to look at that. You can kind of see the top folks. But again, network engineers with automation skills, far and away the top response here. Like 92% of folks responding said that's who's building the automation at their organization. We threw in another question for 2025. It couldn't be a talk in 2025 without talking about AI. So we asked, are you using AI, specifically LLMs, in production in your network, right? So currently deployed with access to production network data and systems, 3%, 16 people said, yes, this is actually happening. We're doing it right now. As you can see, as it goes down, in development or testing, 13%, under consideration or exploratory discussions, 34%, and then no current plans at all, 44%. So that's the biggest percentage is folks who are not even thinking about using AI or LLM specifically in their network. But a pretty good chunk are thinking about it or trialing it, and a few are doing it today. Self-reported, of course. So beyond that, right, I think looking into this, a big part of why I'm conducting this survey is to try to understand how we can get more network automation. I believe it will help everyone, on the individual level and the organizational level, kind of the internet as a whole will probably benefit from more automation. So, what results in the survey point us in those directions? So this is kind of a combination of a couple questions in a response here. So the graph is the actual answers. Again, this is a question where you could check as many things as you wanted, and we said what should be automated. The question was, ignore what is automated. Even if you have it automated, you can still answer here that it should be automated. But like what should be automated? Now, one thing is interesting. I think all of those should be 100%. Personally, I don't know why we shouldn't automate anything, but not everyone agrees, right? The highest response is only 67%. But then what I did is I took the answers to the question of like what is being automated and compared to this question of what should be automated, and these are the gaps, right? So troubleshooting, there was basically 223 people who said troubleshooting should be automated, more than said troubleshooting is automated. So that looks like a big gap. So if you're looking for like quick wins, places to dive in and get started with automation, this list of gaps may be a good place to find where to start, right? So troubleshooting is something that's under automated, capacity planning, traffic engineering, firewall rules, firmware upgrades. These are all things that way more people think should be automated than are actually being automated. Staffing is another interesting question. We asked the question of how many dedicated network automation engineers are working at your organization. 0 is still the winner by far. And then of course we do a follow-up question and say, okay, well then who is doing the automation? And they almost all say me. So again, learning some automation skills seems to be an expectation. There is some growth in like the bigger teams. Again, could be just an anomaly of the more responses, but no dedicated automation staff is definitely still the current trend. Spending. I think this isn't really very valuable information just because in 2025, almost half of people said, I don't know, which is fair, right? A lot of engineers don't understand budgeting, don't know what's being spent on tools, that kind of thing. That's totally fine. So those are the numbers. This is another new question for 2025. We asked, how are you measuring the success of your automation initiatives? And what you can see here is a number one, with 46% of respondents said, we're not. Which when people ask questions about like, how do we get more automation? How do I get my boss on board? How do I get the company on board? How do I get funding for this? How do I get people hired? Maybe start measuring it. Maybe show some results. So some of the ones that did come up, right? Time metrics, right? Are you saving time? Operational metrics, are less mistakes being made? Quality metrics, is the quality of experience for users being impacted by automation in some way? Staff productivity, financial, are we saving money? Customer experience, quality and security compliance and security metrics, which I think should be way higher, was really low on the list. Qualitative feedback from stakeholders. So again, I think for me the big takeaway here is we should be doing more measuring of specific KPIs and metrics on how automation is impacting our work and our business if we want to get more automation. That kind of ties into this question, which is around, are management expectations aligned with the reality, right? So I don't know if you can read all these or not, but management has limited visibility into our automation practices. Was almost 25% of folks, so 128 of the people who answered this question said that management doesn't really know what we're doing with automation. Again, I think that's probably a red flag if you're trying to grow your automation practice. Management expectations matching our actual capabilities is number 2, which is great, 17-18% there. Management being actively involved in defining our automation strategy, again, 17%, that's really good, I think. Should be higher, but it's good to see that's happening. And then there's a couple more of management's either overestimating or underestimating, or there's disagreement among management about our automation status. So still some work to be done, I think, as far as bringing the leadership team along with us to get automation supported and built out in our networks. So basically what that says to me is 52% of organizations, or at least the self-reported engineers who answered this report, say that 52% of our managers are completely misaligned on what we're actually doing with automation in our networks. So again, another place where maybe pay attention there and you can move the needle a little bit. Is there a skills gap? It looks like yes, there is still a bit of a skills gap. I think, again, some of this comes back to the fact that we're asking network engineers to do a whole new job of software development in some cases, but we are asking them to do that. So we asked about their skills. 1 was basically complete novice, 5 was kind of expert level knowledge, and you can see in the percentages here that the folks who answered the survey definitely feel more comfortable with networking than they do with automation. Another way to look at that is that 74% of the people who responded to the survey put themselves in the top 2, right? Like advanced or expert level knowledge of networking, whereas only 44% of those same people put themselves in those top 2 categories for automation skills. Part of that may be that automation skills are a little bit undefined. Like, what does that mean? Does it mean being really good at Ansible? Does it mean knowing Python? Does it mean knowing a tool from a vendor? That's probably part of the problem, is defining automation and what that means. But I think there is really a skills gap there in that we are learning this stuff as we go, as an industry. How is automation affecting staffing? So this is another one we asked, are we training existing? That's the number 1 answer, that existing staff are being trained in automation. No changes at all is number 2 there. Using external resources, right, so bringing in contractors is a big one. Adding new staff is less than a quarter of folks are saying they're adding new staff. Staff being reassigned is a little bit lower as well. And then the bottom one, 2.43% only, which I think is like 8 or 10 people or something responded that they're actually reducing headcount because automation has created efficiencies. So that's interesting. Again, if you're one of those 10 people who answered that you're reducing headcount based on automation progress, I would love to talk to you and understand more about that. Another way to look at this, I think the takeaway here could be flipped though, is that automation staff is growing, right? So whether we're training existing staff, whether we're bringing in consultants and contractors, whether we are actually hiring new dedicated automation staff or reassigning staff to automation roles, those things are happening, which means in general, staffing of automation is growing. Maybe not as fast or as well as we'd like it to. So what's really holding us back? We asked, what are the key barriers? And this is one where we said, you only can pick one, right? What's the number 1 barrier at your organization that's holding back automation? Another way to look at this is stacked ranked like this. So skills challenges comes out as number 1. People don't feel like they have the skills, or their team doesn't have the skills to actually get this stuff done. Organizational challenges, number 2. Cultural challenges, technical, it kind of goes down from there. What I see in this is that 44% roughly, like almost half of the number 1 barriers in organizations are people problems, right? It's either organizational, it's cultural, or it's personality. That doesn't count skills. Skills isn't counted as a people problem. That's a learning thing. So we can look at this here, right? This is year over year. We only started asking this question in 2024, so it's just a comparison of 2024 to 2025. I bolded the bigger numbers. You can kind of see it's shifted a little bit, but fairly static. That skills was number 1, organizational and cultural number 2. Technical challenges is a little bit lower, and it goes down from there. Again, if you squish these together, people problems definitely stand out as the biggest lump of problems. Right? We have the technology. There are ways to do this. You can go learn the skills. You can buy the tools or download the tools you need. Really, it's about structuring your organization, building teams in a way that is conducive to automation, in my opinion. So what does all that mean? We can kind of summarize this down a little bit. I think that as what we saw in those statistics, very interestingly, and I'm definitely doing like a wide margin of error here, but there's a bunch of halves, and I'm calling them the half-nots here because half of organizations are less than 30% automated, roughly, right? Roughly half of organizations have no plans to use LLMs in their network whatsoever. Roughly half of organizations have 0 dedicated automation staff. About half of organizations are not measuring their automation success at all. And about half of organizations have misalignment with their leadership. Also, half of the respondents, only half of the respondents feel comfortable with automation, and about half of the known barriers to automation are people problems. So I think the insights I draw from this, and again, I would like everyone to kind of look at these results, download the slides, take a look at the deeper numbers, decide for yourself. But I think starting with troubleshooting is a great way to both address a major gap. It's also a lower risk way of getting into automation because it can be read-only. And you can build your team's skills in this kind of high impact, low risk way to start using some of these tools. Whatever those tools might be, you can start playing with them in your organization from a troubleshooting perspective, build the skills, and also show some wins, start measuring what that means for the organization, and then potentially get that kind of flywheel rolling, right? Obviously, we need to engage with leadership. We need to both communicate and regulate. By regulate, I mean measure this stuff, right? We need to understand what the business metrics are that we're impacting and know how to measure that and communicate that to leadership in order to get whatever it is we need, more funding, more time, more training. And then, of course, focusing on people, right? Culture eats automation for breakfast, just like it eats strategy for breakfast and everything else. Understanding, the personalities that drive this, the tendency to, want to be an old school network engineer, and knowing that like the master of the CLI is your life is part of this. Building those teams where you've got, systems engineers working alongside network engineers who are working alongside software developers and putting those teams together so we can actually build these tools for consumption by the rest of the organization, I think is important. But generally, looking at the organization and those people problems is going to be very, very helpful. With that, I do have 2 minutes left for questions, if there are any. This slide is there so that there's 60 slides, as I mentioned, in the 30-minute presentation. And I will thank you. I can't see who you are.
Mahesh Jetanandani, Arcus. Just a comment, I know that we already gone over the panel discussion on this, but yes, the numbers do surprise me that something like monitoring and troubleshooting, fairly easy tasks to kind of go after and get at least the automation getting started. So
yeah,
thank you for the numbers. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, one more. Too fast.
Paul Zignoni, network enthusiast. Thank you very much for the data. On the points with the open source and homegrown scripts and commercial tools, do you have a correlation between who's using those and then the size of the teams and networks that they're managing?
Yes, not readily available, but yes, it's in the data. I plan to produce like a more kind of thorough report as well in addition to the presentation this year, and that's the kind of thing I want to start drawing out. So yes, the answer is there. I don't know what it is right now.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, cheers.